Leo manager needed an audience to insult me. I preferred a closed door with Payroll. The chill of a Chicago November morning, circa 2000, usually brought with it a certain quiet anticipation for Sarah Jenkins. She lived in a cozy one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, a charming, tree-lined neighborhood that offered a welcome respite from the downtown corporate jungle. Every weekday, the rhythmic clack of the CTA Brown Line train carried her from the Diversey station, past the sprawling skyscrapers, and deposited her just a few blocks from Sterling Innovations, a mid-sized tech and consulting firm housed in a sleek, if unremarkable, glass and steel building in the Loop. Sarah, 31, was a senior financial analyst, a role she had meticulously carved out over 7 years, starting as a junior accountant and steadily climbing the ladder through sheer diligence and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Her life was built on routine and precision. Mornings began with a strong cup of coffee and the Chicago Tribune, followed by the predictable whir of the L train. At work, her days were a symphony of spreadsheets, budget forecasts, and financial reports. Sarah wasn't flashy. She didn't chase the spotlight. Her satisfaction came from the quiet triumph of a balanced ledger, the clarity of a perfectly structured financial model, and the knowledge that her work provided the bedrock for the company's strategic decisions. She was the invisible gears turning the machine, reliable and indispensable, even if management often overlooked her for more boisterous, self-promoting colleagues. Her colleagues, however, knew her worth. They respected her sharp mind and her unwavering commitment to accuracy. After work, she often found solace in a good book, the quiet hum of her apartment a stark contrast to the city's ceaseless thrum. Sometimes, she'd meet her friend Emily for a casual dinner at a small Italian place on Armitage, discussing everything from market trends to the latest Cubs season. Life was predictable, stable, and for the most part, content. That stability began to fracture with the arrival of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was, in every sense of the word, a force. Tall, with a booming laugh and an infectious, if sometimes disingenuous, charisma, he embodied the quintessential Leo. Flamboyant, self-assured, and with an insatiable hunger for the limelight. He was brought in as the new director of strategic planning, a position that immediately placed him several rungs above Sarah and put him in direct command of several high-profile projects. From day one, Marcus made it clear he was here to shake things up, to inject new energy into what he frequently, and derisively, referred to as Sterling's stagnant corporate bloodstream. Sarah's first major interaction with Marcus was on the Project Phoenix initiative, a critical proposal to acquire a smaller, innovative startup that promised to revolutionize Sterling's market position. Sarah had spent months, often working late into the night, constructing the financial models, risk assessments, and growth projections that formed the backbone of the acquisition strategy. Her analysis was exhaustive, precise, and ultimately the reason the proposal gained traction with the executive board. The day of the final presentation arrived, a tense Tuesday afternoon in the glass-walled boardroom on the 27th floor. The CEO, Alan Sterling, and the entire executive committee were present, their faces a mixture of anticipation and skepticism. Marcus, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, a confident smile playing on his lips. Sarah sat quietly amongst the other team members, a knot of nervousness and pride in her stomach. She had meticulously organized the data, creating compelling slides, and even drafted the presentation's core narrative. Marcus began, his voice resonant and commanding. He spoke passionately about Project Phoenix, painting a vivid picture of future success. But as he clicked through the slides that contained Sarah's exact figures, her carefully crafted charts, her original projections, a chilling realization dawned on her. He presented every piece of data, every strategic insight, as his own. He spoke in the first person, using phrases like "my team and I discovered," and "I projected that." He didn't once mention her name, nor acknowledge the countless hours she had poured into the project. Midway through, the CFO, Mr. Harrison, paused, his gaze fixed on a complex revenue projection model. Marcus, this particular projection, the sensitivity analysis on the post-acquisition revenue streams, it's incredibly detailed. Who ran these numbers? I recall seeing Sarah's initial work on this, and it was quite impressive. Marcus chuckled, a dismissive wave of his hand. Oh, Sarah did some of the initial grunt work, of course. Excellent at following instructions. But I personally refined these models, Mr. Harrison. Took her rough data and shaped it into something truly actionable. It's all about leadership, you see, knowing how to synthesize raw information into strategic insight. He then turned, his eyes briefly flicking to Sarah, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, before he returned his attention to the executives, soaking in their appreciative nods. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on Sarah. Her face burned, a mix of humiliation and incandescent rage. It wasn't just the credit he stole. It was the casual, public dismissal of her intelligence, her competence, her very worth. He needed an audience for his performance, and he had used her as a prop, an invisible backdrop against which he could shine. He had not just insulted her, he had publicly annihilated her professional contribution. The words grunt work echoed in her ears, each syllable a hammer blow. She felt a profound sense of injustice, a raw wound festering in the quiet confines of her mind. She managed to keep her composure for the remainder of the meeting, her hands clenched under the table, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond Marcus's shoulder. As soon as the meeting concluded and the executives filed out, congratulating Marcus on his brilliant work, Sarah practically fled. She bypassed her desk, ignored Emily's questioning glance, and made a beeline for the nearest empty conference room, a small, rarely used space on a lower floor. The door clicked shut, sealing her in a cocoon of despair. The carefully constructed edifice of her composure crumbled. Hot tears streamed down her face, blurring the pristine cityscape visible through the window. It wasn't just the public slight. It was the realization that her quiet dedication, her belief in meritocracy, had been a naive fantasy in the face of Marcus's brazen opportunism. She felt hollowed out, utterly defeated. All those late nights, all that meticulous effort, reduced to grunt work. She wanted to scream, to smash something, to demand an apology. But what good would it do? Marcus had already won the public narrative. For the rest of the day, Sarah worked in a fog, her usual precision replaced by a simmering resentment. She ate her lunch alone, staring blankly at the Chicago River, her mind replaying Marcus's words, his smirk. She considered quitting, packing her bags, and leaving corporate life behind entirely. The thought of facing him again, of continuing to work under his shadow, was unbearable. She imagined herself walking into Alan Sterling's office, handing in her resignation, a defiant act of self-preservation. But then, a colder, harder thought began to form. Quitting would be admitting defeat. It would validate Marcus's arrogant dismissal. It would mean he truly won. And that, she realized, was something she could not allow. As the sun dipped below the city skyline, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, a different emotion began to solidify within her. Not just anger, but a quiet, burning resolve. Her tears dried, leaving behind a cold, steely glint in her eyes. She remembered her father, a pragmatic man who often said, "Never show your hand until you're ready to play your best card." Marcus had needed an audience to insult her. She, on the other hand, preferred a closed door with payroll. The phrase, which had been a half-formed thought earlier, now resonated with a distinct, potent clarity. Sarah knew Sterling Innovation's financial systems like the back of her hand. As a senior financial analyst, she had unparalleled access to ledgers, expense reports, budget allocations, and vendor contracts. She understood the flow of money, the intricacies of the company's internal controls, and, perhaps more importantly, the subtle loopholes and gray areas that ambitious individuals sometimes exploited. Marcus's public arrogance was a facade. She suspected there was something more substantial, more tangible, that lay beneath his polished exterior. People like Marcus, she reasoned, didn't just crave recognition. They often craved tangible rewards, a sense of entitlement. Her plan began to take shape that evening, not with a sudden flash of brilliance, but with the methodical calm that defined her professional life. She wouldn't make a scene. She wouldn't appeal to emotion. She would use facts, figures, and an undeniable paper trail. Her hidden advantage wasn't a secret weapon. It was her expertise, her access, and her meticulous nature. Over the next few weeks, Sarah transformed. Outwardly, she maintained her professional demeanor, even managing a strained smile when Marcus condescendingly complimented her improved efficiency on a minor task. Inwardly, however, she was a predator, patiently stalking her prey. Her evenings and lunch breaks, once dedicated to quiet pursuits, were now consumed by a relentless, secret investigation. She started by reviewing all of Marcus's expense reports since his arrival, cross-referencing them against company policies. Marcus had a generous entertainment budget, but Sarah noticed a pattern of unusually high-end dinners with vague descriptions, often on weekends, sometimes in cities where no sterling business was conducted. She began to scrutinize the vendors he regularly used for consulting services or project support. One particular firm, Aurora Solutions, caught her eye. They were a relatively new, small consultancy, yet they were billing sterling innovations for increasingly substantial amounts, often for deliverables that seemed generic or duplicated across multiple projects. Sarah remembered an obscure company policy from years ago, one that stipulated a competitive bidding process for any vendor contract exceeding a certain threshold, even for emergency services. Marcus had consistently skirted this by keeping individual invoices just below the threshold, even when the cumulative total with Aurora Solutions soared past it. This was a classic tactic designed to bypass oversight. She also delved into project budgets under Marcus's direct supervision. She noticed discrepancies in allocated funds versus actual expenditures, particularly on Project Phoenix, the very initiative he had taken credit for. There were unexplained line items, inflated costs for software licenses that were already owned by Sterling, and allocations for unforeseen contingencies that never seemed to be accounted for in the project's final review. Her investigation wasn't a sudden burst of activity. It was a slow, painstaking accumulation of data. She worked late, sometimes until midnight, after most employees had left. She learned to navigate the company's older, less secure archived financial databases, discovering records of shell companies and past affiliations for Aurora Solutions that linked directly to an old college friend of Marcus's. She found emails, carefully archived in a long-forgotten server backup, that alluded to favors and kickbacks. She even discovered instances where Marcus had subtly manipulated internal bonus structures, redirecting small percentages from other departments into his own discretionary pool, which then correlated suspiciously with his personal spending habits. Sarah was not a hacker or a spy. She simply leveraged her existing access and her unparalleled understanding of financial systems. Every piece of evidence she gathered was a legitimate document, an official record, or an email stored on a company server. She simply knew where to look, how to connect the seemingly disparate dots. She created a meticulously organized digital folder, password-protected, filled with scanned documents, spreadsheet analyses, and cross-referenced reports. Each file was dated, categorized, and annotated with precise explanations of the policy violations or financial irregularities it exposed. She was building an irrefutable case, not for a public spectacle, but for a swift, quiet, and utterly devastating takedown. Her emotional state during this period was complex. The initial anger had morphed into a cold, focused determination. There were moments of fear, the risk of discovery, the potential repercussions if she failed. But beneath the fear was a powerful current of justice, a belief that what Marcus had done was fundamentally wrong, not just to her, but to the company she had dedicated years to. The weight of her secret mission was immense, a constant companion that pushed her through sleepless nights and long, arduous hours. She waited for the opportune moment. Marcus was riding high, basking in the success of Project Phoenix, which had indeed gone through and was showing early signs of promise. He was often seen chatting amiably with the CEO, his star seemingly on the ascendant. Sarah knew that striking when he was at his peak would maximize the impact of his fall. The company's annual audit was approaching, a time when all financial records came under intense scrutiny. It was the perfect storm. One crisp December morning, with the city already buzzing with holiday cheer, Sarah put her plan into motion. She had compiled a comprehensive, 40-page report, complete with an executive summary, detailed evidence, and a clear articulation of the financial fraud, policy violations, and conflict of interest that Marcus Thorne had systematically perpetrated. The report was dispassionate, factual, and utterly damning. She arrived at work early before anyone else. With a practiced hand, she printed 2 copies of her report, bound them professionally, and sealed them in plain envelopes. One envelope was addressed to Alan Sterling, the CEO. The other was addressed to Mr. Harrison, the CFO, the very man who had briefly questioned Marcus's claims during the Project Phoenix presentation. Sarah didn't confront Marcus, didn't leave anonymous notes, didn't create a dramatic scene. She preferred a closed door. She walked directly to the executive floor. With a steady hand, she placed the envelope addressed to Alan Sterling directly on his assistant's desk, marked confidential personal attention of Mr. Sterling. She then did the same for Mr. Harrison's assistant. No words were exchanged, no glances lingered. It was a purely administrative act, yet loaded with the force of 1,000 silent battles. She then returned to her desk, her heart pounding a steady rhythm against her ribs. She sat down, opened her own computer, and began her day's work, a placid exterior masking the tumultuous anticipation within. The consequences were swift and brutal for Marcus. By lunchtime, whispers were circulating. Marcus was seen being escorted into a closed-door meeting with Alan Sterling and Mr. Harrison, his usual swagger conspicuously absent. The meeting stretched for hours. By the end of the day, an internal memo was circulated, terse and to the point. Marcus Thorne has left Sterling Innovations, effective immediately, to pursue other opportunities. The phrasing was standard corporate boilerplate, but the speed and lack of elaboration spoke volumes. The next morning, the office was rife with rumors. Sarah heard snippets: financial irregularities, misuse of company funds, breach of fiduciary duty. She learned, through the office grapevine, that the evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. There was even talk of potential legal action against Marcus, though the company ultimately chose to keep it internal to avoid negative publicity. No one connected the dots back to Sarah. Her role as a quiet, meticulous financial analyst protected her. She hadn't made a spectacle, she had merely presented the facts. The integrity of the payroll, the accuracy of the ledgers, these were her domain, and she had used that domain to expose the rot within. A week later, Alan Sterling himself stopped by Sarah's desk, an unusual occurrence. He didn't mention Marcus. Instead, he spoke about her exceptional work on the Project Phoenix financial models and her unwavering commitment to the company's financial health. He then offered her a promotion to Senior Manager of Financial Controls, a newly created position designed to strengthen internal oversight. The new role came with a significant raise and a direct reporting line to Mr. Harrison. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a silent vindication. Sarah accepted, her voice calm and professional. The new office, with its window overlooking the bustling city below, felt different. It wasn't about power or recognition. It was about the restoration of order, the quiet satisfaction of justice served. The heavy emotional burden of her secret investigation lifted, leaving behind a sense of profound relief, mixed with a faint, lingering taste of the cold, hard reality of corporate ambition. She had sought no applause, no public fanfare. She had simply wanted an honest reckoning, delivered behind a closed door, through the quiet, unassailable language of payroll and financial truth. And in that, she had found her own unique, powerful form of victory.